We live in a world built for comfort. Everything is available in seconds: music, movies, food, attention, even validation. All of it right there whenever we want it. Scroll, tap, swipe, repeat. There's a pattern in all of it. The faster something satisfies us, the more we want it. The more we want it, the less it satisfies. This is the trap. Every app, every notification, every sugar-loaded snack, all engineered to give you a small hit of pleasure, a moment of relief, but not for long. What's behind this? Pleasure in its simplest form is just a chemical, dopamine. It's not happiness. It's not satisfaction. It's just the signal that says, do that again. Dopamine pushes us toward things that feel good, or used to matter. But now, it's not about what's meaningful. It's about what's easy, what's fast. Open your phone. There's a reward. Eat fast food. There's a reward. Watch endless videos. Another hit. But what's actually happening inside the brain? Each time dopamine is released, the brain rewires. It starts learning that the fastest path to that feeling is the best one. Not the healthiest. Not the most valuable, just the quickest. The brain doesn't ask if it's good for you, it just repeats what works. This is what's known as a feedback loop. Dopamine rises, you act, you get a reward. The brain notes the shortcut, and the loop continues. At first it's harmless, you feel better, you enjoy it, but the more you do it, the less it works. The hit gets weaker, the reward fades, you need more. You scroll longer, you eat more, you click faster. And still, it never really satisfies. That's because dopamine works on expectation. When something is new or exciting, it spikes. But over time, that same thing becomes normal. The brain stops reacting, so it takes more to get the same feeling. That's why a simple walk feels boring, why reading feels slow, why silence feels uncomfortable. We've trained our minds to expect constant stimulation, but there's a cost. The constant chase for pleasure dulls everything else. It strips away our patience, our focus, and our ability to sit still. It's why people feel restless without their phones. Why boredom is now unbearable. Why doing nothing feels wrong. This isn't just about willpower, it's biology. The brain becomes less sensitive to pleasure, it gets used to high stimulation, and then lowers the bar for what's considered normal. Things that once made us happy now feel empty. Fast food used to be a treat. Now it's dinner. Short videos used to be entertainment. Now they're background noise. The baseline shifts. But life doesn't adjust with it. So we feel empty, anxious, distracted, like we're chasing something just out of reach. But we're not sure what it is, and we don't question it. We think it's normal, but Socrates would have said otherwise. Because this isn't just about pleasure, it's about control. And the truth is, most of us don't have it. We don't choose pleasure, we react to it, and that's the problem. The trap isn't in wanting pleasure. It's in not being able to stop. It's in mistaking stimulation for satisfaction. And it's in forgetting how to enjoy anything that isn't fast, loud, or easy. That's the cost of modern hedonism, and we're all paying it. Socrates didn't write anything down. Everything we know about him comes from those who studied under him, especially Plato. But despite that, his ideas still shape how we think about truth, ethics, and the purpose of life. He lived in Athens over 2,000 years ago, at a time when people thought wisdom meant having the right answers. Socrates challenged that. He believed real wisdom meant asking better questions. He would walk through the streets, stop people, and ask them what they thought justice meant or what courage was. And then through simple questions, he'd show that they didn't actually know. This made him unpopular with many, but respected by those who understood what he was doing. His goal wasn't to win arguments, it was to show that most people live their lives based on assumptions they never tested, and that's where the phrase comes in. The unexamined life is not worth living. It wasn't meant to sound poetic, it was a warning. A life that runs on autopilot, that chases comfort without reflection, isn't really lived at all. It's just passed through. Socrates believed that most people aren't guided by reason, but by desire. He watched his fellow Athenians pursue wealth, pleasure, and power without questioning why. And he thought that kind of life would always lead to conflict, within the self and with others. Unlike many philosophers after him, Socrates didn't reject pleasure outright. He didn't call it bad or sinful. He simply questioned its role. He asked whether pleasure should be the goal of life, or just a part of it. Because if pleasure is the goal, then the person with the most pleasure wins. But what if chasing pleasure leads to regret? What if it weakens discipline? What if it turns a person into a slave to their urges? For Socrates, living well didn't mean feeling good all the time. It meant developing the mind, shaping character, and learning to control one's impulses. He argued that a person should not be ruled by desire, but by reason. That a good life wasn't built on constant indulgence, but on knowing when to say no. There's a story told by Xenophon, one of his students. In it, Socrates sees a lavish feast prepared, with meats, wines, and every kind of entertainment. His friends are excited. Socrates watches, but he doesn't rush in. Someone asks him why he isn't eager to join. He replies that he doesn't want to become a slave to what's offered, that if he needs those things to feel good, then he's no longer free. He lived simply. He wore the same clothes year-round. He walked barefoot. He ate what was available, not because he wanted to suffer, but because he believed discipline brought freedom. If you could enjoy life without needing excess, you were stronger than the person who always needed more. To him, pleasure was a tool, useful in moderation, dangerous in excess. He warned that if people chase pleasure without understanding it, they would trade away their ability to think clearly. Their choices would no longer come from reason, but from habit. His method, asking questions instead of giving answers, was built on this idea, that people should think for themselves, that before acting they should examine their reasons. He didn't tell people how to live. He asked them why they lived the way they did. In court, when he was sentenced to death for corrupting the youth and disrespecting the gods, he had the chance to avoid execution. He could have begged, he could have fled, but he didn't. He said that escaping would go against the very principles he had taught his whole life. If he couldn't live with integrity, then he didn't want to live at all. He drank poison calmly, and with that left behind a message stronger than any speech, that a life built on comfort is empty if it lacks reflection. That knowledge of the self is more important than any temporary pleasure. And that real strength comes not from chasing what feels good, but from understanding what is good. Socrates didn't give us a formula. He gave us a process, a way of thinking, a challenge, to look at how we live, question what we chase, and ask whether our choices come from clarity or just habit. And that question, even now, still matters. Humans are built to seek what feels good. This isn't random, it's designed. For most of history, comfort was rare, and survival came first. Food, shelter, protection, these were rewards. When people found them, the brain released chemicals to encourage more of the same. The mind learned to repeat actions that worked. This is how pleasure became tied to survival. Evolution didn't give us pleasure for fun. It gave it to us as feedback, a way to signal that something was helping us continue. That's why sweetness means calories, why touch means safety, why novelty meant possible advantage. The people who followed those signals survived. The people who ignored them didn't. But those instincts didn't disappear. The world changed, but the brain didn't. Today, most people don't need to hunt or fight for survival. Food is everywhere. Warmth is standard. Stimulation is constant. But the brain still works like it's in the wild. It still pushes people toward reward, toward ease, toward escape. That's why so many can't sit still without distraction. Why silence feels strange. Why people keep checking phones, even when there's nothing new. The brain's still searching, still chasing, even when it doesn't need to. Childhood shapes this early. From the start, discomfort is avoided. Crying leads to comfort. Boredom gets filled with toys or screens. Good behavior earns praise. Bad behavior brings correction. Without knowing it, people learn to associate pleasure with approval and discomfort with failure. Over time, the mind begins to believe that comfort equals value, that being entertained means being okay, that avoiding pain is the goal. Then comes the world outside. The world that noticed this instinct and turned it into a business. A world where attention is currency and distraction is the product. Modern capitalism doesn't just meet needs, it creates them. It turns comfort into a lifestyle, stimulation into identity. It teaches people to want faster phones, newer clothes, better experiences, not because they're useful, but because they're sellable. This is what's known as manufactured desire, wanting things not because they improve life, but because they represent status. People buy pleasure thinking they're buying meaning, but they're not. It's the same pattern everywhere. Endless ads promising happiness in a product. Influencers selling lifestyles built on consumption. Subtle messages that say, if you don't feel good, it's because you're missing something, and that something can be bought. Pleasure becomes a product, and the person becomes the consumer. The market doesn't just offer pleasure, it promises fulfillment. But that promise can't be kept, because pleasure fades. The new car becomes old, the fresh taste becomes familiar, the exciting place becomes normal, and then the search starts again. More apps, more noise, more options, but none of it fills the space. This isn't a theory. People at the top often talk about it. Celebrities, entrepreneurs, public figures, those who've reached every goal, bought every comfort, still speak about feeling nothing. Not because they're ungrateful, but because the reward didn't last. They chased the peak and found that it was empty. Socrates warned of this. He said that chasing pleasure without wisdom leads to confusion. That no object, no feeling, no moment can carry lasting worth unless it's understood. The Stoics said the same, that the person who depends on external things to feel okay is never free. Pleasure, when treated like a goal, becomes a trap, because it teaches the brain that satisfaction is always outside, always somewhere else, and as long as that belief stays, nothing will ever be enough. The ancient thinkers didn't reject pleasure. They questioned its place. They believed it should serve the person, not control them. The modern world reversed that. It told people that meaning comes through experience, through consumption, through appearance. It made pleasure the standard. And now, discomfort feels like failure. But discomfort isn't failure. It's part of life, part of growth. And without it, there's no strength, no direction, just repetition. That's why people are tired, not from doing too much, but from chasing too little. Pleasure isn't the problem. It's the misunderstanding of what it means. It was never meant to guide life, only to reward it. When that's forgotten, pleasure becomes noise, and silence starts to feel like something's missing. But maybe nothing's missing. Maybe people just forgot how to stop chasing and start thinking. The modern world sells freedom as choice. The more options you have, the more free you are. Choose what to eat, where to go, who to follow, what to watch. Do what you want, when you want. That's what we're told freedom means. But choice without control doesn't create liberty. It creates confusion. When every desire must be acted on, when every craving leads to action, the person isn't free. They're reacting, they're following, they're moved by impulse. That's what hedonism offers. It tells people to seek comfort, to avoid discomfort, to indulge, because life is short. But what begins as freedom becomes dependence. The more someone chases pleasure, the harder it becomes to live without it. They need stimulation to focus, noise to relax, comfort to function. And now they can't stop. This is the paradox. Hedonism promises freedom, but delivers the opposite. When every want must be satisfied, the person becomes controlled by the very things they chase. They lose discipline, they lose direction, they follow feelings, but never lead them. Socrates saw this over 2,000 years ago. He watched people in his city run from pain, run toward pleasure, and call that happiness. But he didn't agree. He believed real freedom had nothing to do with getting what you want. It had everything to do with mastering what you want. He said, no man is free who is not master of himself. Because if someone can't say no to their impulses, then they aren't in charge. If they can't wait, can't pause, can't resist, then their life is shaped by habit, not reason. And that's not freedom, that's control, just not the kind you notice. Socrates didn't live in luxury. He didn't chase excess. He chose simplicity. He thought less about what he could get and more about what he could control. His focus was the mind. He wanted to understand why people live the way they do and whether their choices come from thought or just reaction. He believed that if a man could control himself, he could never be truly poor. Because real poverty wasn't about possessions. It was about being owned by desires that never stop growing. There's an old example often used to explain this. Two people live side by side. One wakes up early, works with discipline, eats with restraint, and speaks with purpose. The other sleeps late, eats whatever he wants, changes tasks constantly, and avoids discomfort whenever possible. From the outside, the second man might look happier. But inside, he's pulled by whatever urge shows up. He changes direction with his mood. He reacts, not because he chooses to, but because he has to. That's not strength. That's dependence. He might feel free, but only until the feeling fades. The first man may appear rigid, but he makes his choices. He doesn't need to act on every urge. He can sit still. He can delay reward. He isn't ruled by what feels good, but by what matters. That's what Socrates called freedom. This idea isn't just old philosophy. It plays out today in everything from addiction to distraction. When people can't stop checking their phones, they're not choosing, they're responding. When someone can't sit through silence, they're not in charge. Something else is. The modern world encourages people to seek what's easy. But real control doesn't come from doing whatever you want. It comes from knowing when not to. The power to choose is only useful when you can also choose not to act. Without that, freedom becomes empty. It's just motion without direction. So Socrates rejected the idea that freedom meant pleasure. He believed it meant discipline. Not restriction for its own sake, but order. A life where the mind guides action, not the other way around. That's why he taught through questions. He wanted people to examine themselves, to see where they were being led by desire without knowing it. He wasn't against enjoyment. He just wanted it placed in the right order. Because when people chase freedom through indulgence, they trade long-term strength for short-term feeling. They lose the ability to delay, to endure, to decide. And when that's gone, what's left isn't freedom. It's obedience. Just not to another person, to impulse. And impulse doesn't care where you end up. Self-control is often misunderstood. People think it means holding yourself back, denying pleasure, avoiding fun. It sounds like a restriction, like something forced. But that's not what it is, at least not how philosophers like Socrates saw it. Self-control isn't about punishment. It's about knowledge. It means being aware of your own patterns, understanding where your thoughts come from, why certain habits exist, what pulls you toward certain things and away from others. It's not about saying no to yourself. It's about knowing when yes doesn't serve you. Socrates didn't tell people to resist life. He asked them to examine it. He didn't give commands, he asked questions. And the most important ones were directed inward. Why do I want this? What happens if I don't get it? What am I avoiding? These aren't just philosophical questions. They reveal the structure behind desires. Most of the time, when people want something, food, attention, distraction, it isn't random. It has a trigger, a cause, a reason, even if they don't see it right away. The Socratic method is simple. Instead of acting on a thought, you question it. You slow it down. You take a step back from the impulse and observe it. I want to scroll through my phone. Why? I'm bored. Why is boredom a problem? Because it feels uncomfortable. And why can't I sit with discomfort? Keep asking, and eventually you find the root. Sometimes it's fear. Sometimes it's habit. Sometimes it's emptiness. The point is not to judge the feeling, but to understand it. Because once you understand it, it loses control over you. In modern terms, this is what cognitive behavioral therapy does. It teaches people to recognize thoughts, challenge them, and replace them with better ones. Not to suppress the emotion, but to change the reaction to it. Because most suffering doesn't come from the thought itself. It comes from how we respond to it. Mindfulness takes the same approach. It doesn't fight the mind, it watches it. Thoughts arise, and instead of following them, you notice them. That pause is where freedom begins. It gives you space. And in that space, you can choose. That's the difference between reaction and awareness. Reaction is automatic, awareness is deliberate. Take something as simple as eating. Someone opens the fridge, grabs a snack, and eats it. Not because they're hungry, but because it's there. That's impulse. Now imagine they pause. Ask, am I hungry? If the answer is no, and they still eat, at least it's a choice. That's the key. Making it a choice, not a reflex. Self-control isn't about always choosing the hard thing. It's about knowing why you're choosing anything. Without that, even pleasure becomes mindless. Delayed gratification works the same way. It's the ability to wait, to hold off on what feels good now for something better later. It's not about denial, it's about trade-offs. The famous marshmallow test showed this in children. Kids were given a marshmallow and told they could eat it now or wait and get to later. The ones who waited often did better in later life. Not because they were smarter, but because they had learned to manage themselves. That ability carries over into school, into relationships, into work. Because life is full of decisions where the easy option hurts more in the long run. Now apply that to phones, food, social media, entertainment. Most of those systems are built to remove friction. No waiting, no boredom, no effort. But the more people get used to that, the harder it becomes to resist, and the weaker their control gets. Here's a simple case. Two people come home from work. One automatically puts on YouTube, scrolls Instagram, eats snacks, and loses track of time. The other sits, pauses, decides what to do, then acts. Same environment, different outcome. The second person isn't better. They just stopped the automatic response. They looked at the impulse before acting on it. That's the skill. It's not suppression, it's awareness. Because control doesn't come from force. It comes from clarity, from asking the right questions, from seeing the pattern. And once you see it, you're no longer inside it. You're above it. And that's where freedom actually starts. In ancient Athens, philosophy wasn't just something people studied. It was something they lived. Socrates didn't write books. He walked the streets asking questions. He didn't lecture. He spoke with people. He believed philosophy should change how someone lives, not just how they think. One of his core principles was simplicity. Not because he hated comfort, but because he saw how too much comfort weakens the mind. He owned little. He ate what was needed. He walked barefoot. Not to suffer, but to stay sharp. When there's less to depend on, the mind becomes stronger. And when the body isn't ruled by pleasure, the brain stays clear. He practiced reflection daily. Not in isolation, but through conversation. He believed questions could reveal blind spots. Why do you eat that? Why do you want more? Is it necessary? These weren't criticisms. They were tools. Each question pointed at a habit, and each answer led to awareness. He didn't just want people to know things, he wanted them to understand themselves. This way of thinking didn't stop with him. After Socrates, a group of thinkers took his ideas further. One of them was Plato, his student. Another was Zeno, who later founded Stoicism. Stoicism built on the Socratic method but focused more on how to live with inner control in a chaotic world. Their idea was simple. Don't rely on what you can't control. Focus on what you can, your choices, your thoughts, your actions. One Stoic method was negative visualization. Imagine losing what you have. Not to feel bad, but to remember that comfort is not permanent. This thought builds appreciation. It also reduces fear. If you've thought about loss, you're less afraid of it. Another tool was voluntary discomfort. Fast for a day. Sleep on the floor. Wear plain clothes. These weren't punishments, they were exercises. They trained the mind not to panic when comfort disappears. They showed that need and want aren't always the same. Journaling was common. At the end of the day, write down your actions. What you did. What you failed to control. What you can do better. This practice isn't new, it's reflection. Just like Socrates taught, but in private. Now look at today. The tools are different. The purpose is the same. Digital detox means turning off devices. Why? Because endless connection makes focus harder. Constant input weakens attention. By cutting it off, even for a short time, the brain resets. Minimalism is the idea of owning less, not as a trend, but as a way to remove clutter. When there's less, attention returns. It's not about poverty, it's about choice, about not letting objects shape how you think. Dopamine fasting is a newer term, but the idea is old. Avoid pleasure for a while. No sugar, no screens, no noise. Give the brain a break. Let the baseline reset. Let boredom return. Because boredom isn't the enemy. It's the space where thought begins. What's interesting is how these modern solutions mirror ancient practice. Socrates didn't use dopamine charts, but he knew overindulgence dulled the mind. The Stoics didn't have smartphones, but they understood how easy pleasure can take control. They created methods, not to avoid pleasure forever, but to manage it, to use it wisely, to not let it decide everything. none of these methods are extreme. They don't require you to live in the woods or reject society. They just ask for awareness. A few pauses, a few questions. Do I need this? What am I avoiding? Is this helping me grow? Socrates would say the same. His goal wasn't to tell people what to do. It was to help them see why they do what they do. That's what philosophy is. Not theory, not debate. It's practice. It's a lens for everyday life. And addiction, whether digital, emotional, or chemical, feeds on mindlessness. It grows when people stop paying attention. It wins when actions become automatic. Philosophy, ancient or modern, doesn't cure addiction, but it slows it down, it breaks the cycle. It forces thought where there was once reaction. In a world full of noise, simplicity becomes power. In a culture built on distraction, awareness becomes a tool. The answers aren't always new. Sometimes they're just forgotten. But the tools were always there. And they still work. In a world built for speed, stimulation, and shortcuts, choosing a different path takes effort. The Socratic life is not about rejecting the world, it's about understanding your place in it. It starts with a simple idea. Know yourself, not in theory, not as a phrase, but in action. Begin with attention. Look at your day. Where does your time go? What do you reach for first thing in the morning? What do you consume when you're bored? What habits repeat without thought? These are not just actions. They are signals. They show where control ends and reaction begins. Socrates would say, you can't change what you don't see. So the first step is to see clearly. Not judge, just observe. List your patterns. Note your distractions. Ask simple questions. Why do I do this? What happens if I stop? What purpose does it serve? This isn't about guilt. It's about knowledge. When you spot the loop, you can step out of it. Once you've seen the habits, you begin the practice of questioning. You pause before action. You interrupt the automatic. You ask, what am I really looking for here? It could be food, entertainment, noise, attention. But behind every action is a need. And behind every need is a belief. This is the core of Socratic thinking. Not telling yourself no, but asking yourself why. When you want to check your phone, ask what triggered it. When you want to eat out of boredom, ask what you're avoiding. These small gaps in action create space. And that space gives you choice. Over time, those questions form a habit. You become less reactive. You start choosing instead of responding. You move from impulse to intent. Socrates didn't believe in self-denial for the sake of pain. He didn't ask people to suffer, he asked them to think. And from thinking comes clarity. Not giving up pleasure, but placing it in the right order. Letting meaning come first. Letting joy be the result, not the goal. To live this way, structure matters. Habits shape identity. So you build a routine, not one filled with rules, but with purpose. Wake up and ask, what do I value today? Reflect at night. Did my actions follow that? Create a few practices, not many, just enough to bring awareness. A short moment of silence in the morning. A pause before meals. A question before spending. A walk without headphones. These acts seem small, but they teach attention. They bring your mind back from autopilot. The purpose is not to cut yourself off from life. It's to re-enter life with focus. To act from reason, not reflex. Discipline isn't force, it's direction. When you know what you stand for, decisions become easier. The noise of the world doesn't disappear, but it stops controlling you. You start building your life from the inside. You stop outsourcing your mind to algorithms and trends. You start deciding what matters, not once, but daily. This process isn't fast, it takes repetition, but every small win builds trust. Every clear decision sharpens the mind. Every moment of stillness strengthens will. Over time, your identity shifts. You become the kind of person who thinks before acting, who questions before choosing, who lives on purpose. And in that shift, pleasure returns. Not the kind that fades quickly, but the kind that comes from effort, from building something real, from using time well, from knowing you are free, not because you can do anything, but because you are not owned by anything. This is the Socratic life. Not a rulebook, not a religion, a method, a practice, a quiet resistance to distraction, a slow rebuilding of the self. And you don't need to escape the world to begin. You just need to ask better questions. Because the real power was never in pleasure itself. It was in the mind that chooses when it matters. And that mind can be trained. We began with the problem: modern addiction to pleasure. Not just substances or screens, but a deeper pattern. The search for more. The endless pursuit of comfort, attention, and novelty. It's in the small habits, the routines, the choices we repeat without thought. We broke that down. Not just through theory, but through how the brain works. Dopamine, habit loops, instant reward. The structure that keeps us hooked. We looked at how this isn't just biology. It's been shaped by systems. Consumerism turned stimulation into a product. Companies compete to hold your focus. The goal is to keep you watching, scrolling, buying. But we didn't stop there. We traced it back further. Socrates, a man without wealth, without luxury, who still called himself free. He taught through questions. He challenged people to look inward, to stop chasing and start thinking, to test their impulses, to ask not just, what do I want, but why do I want it? He didn't say pleasure was wrong. He said pleasure needed to be understood. Without awareness, it becomes control. With awareness, it becomes a choice. That idea turned into practice. We broke the illusion that self-control is punishment. We saw it instead as direction. Choosing long-term growth over short-term escape. Understanding the forces that shape your thoughts. Creating space between feeling and reaction. From there, we looked at ancient methods. Not just talk, but actions. Simplicity. Reflection. Discipline through practice. Voluntary discomfort. These weren't acts of self-denial. They were tools to train the mind. And we connected those to now. The same patterns still exist, just faster, louder, harder to notice. But the answers are still useful. Digital breaks, slow living, real rest. The tools exist. The path is clear. What changes everything is the decision to begin. It starts small. Seeing your habits, questioning your desires, creating moments of stillness, replacing reactivity with intention. You don't need to reject the world. Just don't let it control your time, your focus, your choices. You become someone who acts with reason, who chooses clarity over noise, who builds discipline not for show but for peace. Now think about what that life could be. Not filled with cravings, not shaped by algorithms, not defined by what others sell you. A life where boredom doesn't scare you, where silence doesn't feel empty, where pleasure isn't something chased but something earned. That life doesn't need more. It needs less. Less reaction, less distraction, more purpose, more thought. This isn't a rejection of enjoyment. It's the recovery of control. A new way of living, not led by desire but by understanding. Socrates didn't offer a final answer. He offered a way to think. And through that thinking, a way to live. He who is not contented with what he has would not be contented with what he would like to have. The new path isn't about forcing change. It's about seeing clearly, asking better questions, and choosing to live deliberately. Thank you for following us on this journey to quit pleasure seeking. If you found this video valuable, kindly like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more content. Thank you.